alcohol, smoking, tobacco, why Islam is so firm against such habits and clearing some misconceptions about Islam. It's also important for today's students so that they understand how certain habits quietly shape up their life. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wassabihi ajmain amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Before I begin today's topic, I want to share a little context about myself. Not to make this video about me, but so that what I am about to discuss makes sense. Although I was born into a Muslim family, I wasn't a practicing Muslim until my late 20s. Over the years, there were reasons that made me to align myself more and more with Islam. That journey has depth and it deserves its own space. Inshallah, I will speak about it in a separate episode sometime later. As I started practicing Islam more consciously, something else began to happen. My friends, my neighbors, my colleagues, people who have known me for long time started asking questions, doubts about Islam, about Muslims, about things. And honestly, that was natural. When people see a visible change in someone, questions are bound to come. What made me to realize was not the questions themselves, but how little Islam is actually understood by many of my well meaning people, my friends. I'm actually glad they asked because if they had not, I would never have realized how many misunderstandings exist. I took those questions as an opportunity to clarify whenever I had a chance. But I also realized many questions cannot be answered in a passing conversations. Some need context, some need time, some need calm explanation. A few questions came through WhatsApp as well, and again, I couldn't respond properly over there, writing in a text, and it requires a context, a detailed one. That's when I decided to communicate not just with those who asked me questions, but with a wider audience who may have similar curiosity, similar doubts, or even similar questions, and on much more broader topics, not necessarily on those cherry picked ones. Inshallah, I hope it will benefit both Muslims and non Muslims alike. That is why I am starting this channel with that intention. Initially, I had planned to begin with deeper theological ideas, spirituality, and clearing some misconceptions about Islam, but with some reasons, I felt there is a need to change my priority. So today's topic is about certain harmful habits, how they start, where they lead us, and how as a society we slowly made them so much normal that we don't question them anymore. Inshallah, I will explain why Islam is so firm against such habits that cause such widespread harm to the society. I also find myself in a kind of unique position, I think, to reflect on this. Some of you might also have experienced. I have seen life from multiple phases, growing up at home until about 18, then 4 years of hostel life for graduation, then several years as a working bachelor, and then the married life. Each phase teaches something. As Allah says, this life is a test for us for hereafter. Same way, each phase of life is a test, a different test. And when we look back, we understand the patterns. When we examine, they become more and more clearer. It's about sharing what I have observed honestly and responsibly, especially for the parents and the younger generation. Now, talking about my hostel life and my first exposure to so many friends. I hardly had a few friends in the beginning. And that hostel life and the friends I made there played a huge role in shaping who I am today. It was during those years that I truly grew from a boy into a man. Living together with friends changed my mindset in a positive way. It taught me how to reason, how to express my views, how to listen to others, even when their thoughts are very different from mine. I learned how to adjust, how to compromise when needed, and also how to listen to people, to live with them who came from different backgrounds, different faiths, different traditions, and we shared our happiness, we shared our struggles, we supported each other through academics, personal difficulties, and also emotional lows. Coming from different places, towns, we united in all our daily life, and that bond remains strong even today. It's been more than 20 years have passed. In fact, it's 23 years to be precise. We are still connected. We meet when we can, we help each other, we stand by each other. Those years of togetherness created a deep understanding, one that time, our belief, our faith did not break. Those were genuine moments, real friendships, shared memories. Those who have not lived this kind of life, living together with friends, may find it difficult to fully understand how deep those connections really are. That phase of life leaves an imprint, and I carry that me with me forever. And it is precisely because of that honesty, that respect for those memories, what I am about to talk about next matters so much to me. At the same time, it is not easy for me. But every environment, no matter how meaningful, also carries some influences. Because alongside all these beautiful experiences, one thing also quietly entered our lives. Certain habits, alcohol, smoking, tobacco, they slowly become part of our everyday life. Now, talking about little my about my upbringing. Until I moved to hostel for my graduation, I had never been exposed to people drinking alcohol. Not in my close family, not among relatives, not in our social circle. All of these were considered morally wrong. In the environment I grew up in, and I want to be very clear here, we were not even religious at that time. Still, these habits were seen bad. At that age, my thinking was I didn't just think that those habits were bad, I thought the people who did these things were also bad people. Of course, that is not my thinking anymore. That's how strongly negative these habits were viewed in my mind. I am not reflecting on the past to expose or blame anyone. I am reflecting because the story is not unique. This pattern repeats across batches, across hostels, across pages, across cities. Many of you who have lived away from home will recognize it. This reflection is important for parents who send their children away from home for studies, often with the best intentions. It's also important for today's students so that they understand how certain habits quietly shape up their life over time. Reflection is not about blame, it's how we learn without repeating the same mistake from generation to generation. So, with that intent, I am briefing you all about my own personal experiences. Now, returning to my hostel life. The first New Year night, I still remember this clearly even after so many years. I went out with my friend and then we came back in the late evening. When we walked into a room where a few of my friends were sitting, there were alcohol bottles in front of them. That was a moment of shock. I was so shocked. Even today, I remember that picture in my memory. Slowly, one by one, others started joining. May not be on the same night, but it did happen eventually. Some of them had never touched alcohol in their entire lives. Those days became the starting point of their journey with drinking. During college days, because we were pretty much financially dependent on the parents, it wasn't very frequent. But something important had already happened. The mental barrier was broken. After graduation, when we started working and earning, this occasional habit moved to the next level. It was once a week, during weekends, then twice, then sometimes three times a week. Some managed to control it, some couldn't. When I look back now, I realize something important. Nobody started with the intention of harming themselves. Nobody planned addiction. Nobody imagined hospitals or the consequences. I have been seeing and hearing the same stories repeat itself around me in the extended circles, in the news. Good people, ordinary people, people with families, people with responsibilities, slowly getting pulled into all these habits, sometimes even gambling. But the story itself is strangely similar. It usually starts quietly as a habit, sometimes could be as a stress relief, as just a phase, as something fully under control, and then over time things begin to change. For some, it shows up as health problems at a later stage of their life. For some, it could be a financial strain. For some, it could be an emotional distance at home. And in even some cases, people are no longer with us. When someone passes away prematurely, the loss is not just of a life, it is the loss of roles. A father who was meant to play with his children, guide them, protect them, and be present as they grow suddenly becomes a memory. Children grow up without their presence of their father, without that guidance, without even someone to hold their hand through life's most important moments. A spouse who was meant to share life, the good days, the difficult days, the silent days, is no longer there. A son who was meant to take care of their parents in their old age, to support them, to give us strength, to be around, to give us some reassurance, he is no longer around. The damage did not arrive suddenly, it accumulated silently over years. And when it finally showed itself, it was already heavy. This is why these conversations are a bit uncomfortable, and this is exactly also I feel there is a need we need to discuss, we need to share these memories. Because when the same story keeps repeating itself, this is no longer an exception, it is a pattern. And to understand why these patterns keep repeating, we need to look beyond individuals. And it is not about individual at all. And we have to reflect on what we as a society have slowly made it normal. I'm not saying this happens to everyone who are involved, who drinks. I'm not saying one path guarantees one outcome. I'm only saying is this certain habits carry risks. It's like somebody is overspeeding. There are so many people who overspeeds in a car, in a two-wheeler, and so on. Not everybody meets with an accident, but it carries its risk. It does leads to hospitals. It leads to consequences. It has its own impact. So we need to talk about. We don't have to talk about individuals, but about environments as a whole. About how certain behaviors become normal and about what that normalization quietly leads to. Now, the real question is, how do habits that are clearly harmful become so common, so accepted that we barely question them anymore? Most social evils don't spread because people are bad. When something is seen often enough, it stops triggering resistance, not because it became safe, but because it became familiar. When people admire, normalize something, we stop questioning it. Even what you see on New Year wishes, which has recently passed, we have seen how the birthday wishes, the anniversaries are shared with alcohol bottles and so on. The message is very clear and it is consistent. Enjoyment is linked with intoxication, they go hand in hand together. Normalization doesn't only happen on screens, unfortunately, it also happens inside our homes. Children learn much more from what they see than what they hear and what they are told. So, when certain habits are practiced openly, the mental barrier is already lowered. Environment educates silently. At this point, some of you may respond defensively. They say we didn't force anyone, everyone makes their own choice. And that is very much true. I completely agree on that point. No one forces anyone. Everyone's responsibilities ultimately lies with them, with that individual. But influence does not always come through that force, through seeing the same thing again and again without consequences being shown, especially for the young people who are still forming their boundaries. This doesn't mean one person is responsible for the another person's actions, but it does mean that when society collectively normalizes something harmful, more people will eventually walk down that path. Normalization doesn't create addiction, it creates the condition for addiction. The pattern is not limited to substance, it applies equally to gambling as well, whether it's traditional form of gambling or the modern forms that are marketed as smart and harmless and whatnot. I think we are seeing all around us how gambling has started even in our own country. So some may say, why single out alcohol or these kind of habits? There are other foods or drinks are also harmful, like they are carbonated drinks or and so on. Yes, you are right. Problem is the nature of these things. Take a simple example. If someone drinks 1 glass of milk every day, even after years, they are likely to still drink the same just 1 glass. Milk doesn't demand escalation. It doesn't push you to drink 5 glasses or 10. It doesn't hijack judgment. But these bad habits, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, are very different. By their nature, they don't remain at the same level. One drink seeks another, one bet seeks a bigger bet, one win seeks a higher risk. These things are not just habits, they are designed chemically or psychologically to pull the person forward, not by force, but by their desire. There is another reality we don't talk about often enough. Starting is usually easy, quitting is not. Once a habit becomes addictive, it slowly takes away choice. What begins as control quietly turns into dependence. I have seen this very closely. I have seen how long it takes for someone to to step away even when they genuinely want to. It's not because they are weak, it's because addiction is designed to hold on. This is also where I realize something important. When quitting depends only on willpower, many people struggle. But when there is a clear moral boundary, a line you don't negotiate with, it becomes much easier to hold on to. There are much more wider social impact rises from society. Just last month, for example, a major newspaper, it had a headline where women themselves said liquor is destroying our families. They all gathered and in a specific place and where they're demanding action against alcohol sales. This wasn't a religious platform, this wasn't a moral lecturer, this was lived experience speaking out. And you hear similar concerns repeatedly at the ground level. Many households speak about the same struggle, income earned with difficulty and then lost to alcohol, not occasionally but habitually. The result is not just health damage, it is the financial stress, the emotional trauma, and instability at home, the domestic abuse, the list continues. This is not about shaming anyone. Addiction doesn't discriminate anyone, whether education, its profession, or income, your religion, you are Muslim, you are a Hindu, you are a Christian. But its impact is felt almost painfully by everyone, by every family who have the least margin to absorb loss. When addiction enters a home, it rarely affects just one person. It quietly rearranges the lives of everyone around them. And the impact doesn't stop inside homes. Many times it also spills onto roads. A significant number of road accidents happen because someone chooses to drink and drive. In many of these cases, the person who dies is not the one who was drinking. It is an innocent pedestrian, another driver, a family returning home. One person's loss of judgment becomes another family's permanent loss. It's a nightmare. This is why these issues cannot be reduced to personal choices anymore. As someone who practices Islam, I don't see Islam as a set of rituals alone. Islam presents itself as the way of life. And if something truly claims to be the way of life, then it must be able to speak to real human problems. Not just the matter of worship, but the matter of behavior, society, family, and responsibility. Over the years, as I reflected more on Islam, I realized something important. Allah doesn't wait for problems to explode. He addresses them at the level of habits, environment, and values long before consequences appear. So, when I see repeated patterns of harm in the society, it is natural for me to reflect on Allah's guidance through Islam. Its framework consistently speaks to the very issues we are struggling with today. That is why, when discussing social issues, I don't separate Islam from life. I turn to it rather as a lens. And when we look at these issues through that lens, Islam's preventive wisdom begins to make sense. When I read the Quran, I realize that Islam does not treat alcohol, gambling, and all these habits as isolated actions. Rather, Islam looks at them as systems that harm individuals, families, and society over time. That is why Allah doesn't just say don't consume alcohol, He goes further, prohibiting consuming, it could be producing, it could be selling, serving, promoting, even indirectly financially getting benefited from these things. At first glance, this might feel excessive for those who don't agree, but we need to clearly think about it. If something is genuinely harmful, supporting it indirectly also a form of harm. At this point of time, I want to speak for a moment to Muslim parents. As we already know, Islam shows itself how we raise our children. We know how to prepare them for the world. We know how to help them face real challenges. And everybody acknowledges today, all Muslims pretty much, modern education is important. There is no debate on that. There is no second thoughts about it. Everybody wants their kids to be professionally successful, but the values cannot be postponed. I do not want to seem like lecturing on this because many Muslim parents already you understand these things, how important it is. But for those who are slightly thinking that okay, modern education is more important, Islamic education can wait, it can come later. For them, I would like to tell, when children step outside home, they go to hostel, they go to campuses and workplaces. It is not the knowledge alone that protects them, it is the internal clarity. Islamic education, in that sense, is not an alternative to modern education. Rather, it is the foundation that helps young people draw boundaries when there is no one around watching them. And I say this not as a critic, but as someone who has lived through multiple phases of life. Interestingly, the Quran, when we read through, it also acknowledges that people see some positive perceived benefit in these, especially alcohol, for example. It clearly states the harm is far greater than their benefit. And Quran also speaks very clearly about this, and it groups together intoxicants and gambling and describes them as things that corrupt judgment and create harm in society. And this wisdom is not unique to Islam alone. Many religious traditions and cultures have warned against intoxication, loss of self-control, and destructive gambling. Different scriptures, different languages, but the same concern, protecting human beings from harming themselves. Some of you may respond by saying, I know someone who drank all his life and still lived till 60s or 70s. But listen, living long is not the same thing as living well. Survival does not mean there was no cost. The real question is not how long did he live. The real questions are how was his health? How was his presence at home? How much did his family carry silently? What kind of examples was set for the next generation? Many people survive habits, families endure them. Islam does not measure life only by years lived, it measures life by clarity, by responsibility, by dignity, the charity, and the impact. And when a habit consistently damages these, pointing to an exception does not make it safe, it only makes the risk much more easier to ignore. I want to speak directly now to the younger generation. And when I say that, I am also speaking to my nieces, my nephews, my brother-in-law, my younger relatives, and all the students and working professionals out there. This is the phase of life when we feel the strongest, energetic, confident, resilient. During these years, the body often doesn't react immediately to the harm being built inside. You may drink, you may smoke, you may experiment, and still wake up the next morning feeling you are completely fine. That is where the illusion begins. Because the body doesn't complain immediately, the mind assumes nothing is happening. I am full in control. This doesn't affect me. One of the biggest misunderstanding we have today is assuming that no immediate harm means no harm at all. And when limits are crossed repeatedly, consequences don't ask for permission very often. The real impact shows up later, in the 40s and beyond. What feels harmless at 25 feels very different at 45. And this is the painful part. By the time the consequences become visible, the habits are already deeply rooted. Quitting is no longer a decision, it becomes a struggle. So, if there is one thing I want you to take from this, is this: don't judge safety by how you feel today, judge it by where it leads over time. You will be invited by friends, by classmates, by colleagues. You will be told it's just once, everyone does it. Don't be so strict. This is the moment where lines has to be drawn. Drawing a line doesn't make you backward. It does not make you weak. It makes you conscious. You don't need to judge anyone. You don't need to lecture anyone. Just don't get carried away. I recently spoke to someone from the younger generation, one of the reputed colleges, still studying in colleges, and what he said stayed with me. He told me that today the pressure doesn't always come in obvious ways. Sometimes those who don't drink also simply ask to stay back. Just be with us in case we need help, in case someone drinks too much. But slowly, just being present becomes participation. And over time, some of those who never intended to drink end up drinking themselves. He also said something else which is much more important. If you are someone who doesn't drink or doesn't smoke, or if you are not often considered normal. You may not be openly criticized, but you are quietly excluded. You don't feel part of the group. You don't feel included. And for a young person, that feeling matters more than we like to admit. Many people don't give in because they want to drink, they give in because they don't want to feel left out. This is why drawing boundaries is not easy. It is not just about willpower, it is also about your identity, about your belonging and your courage. And this is what I want the younger generation, especially all the students and working professionals, to understand. Being different does not mean being weak. Being excluded does not mean being wrong. In fact, many times it means you had the strength to stand your ground. The strongest people are not those who blend in everywhere. They are the one who can stand alone without losing themselves. The strongest people are not those who says yes to everything. They are the one who know where to stop before stopping becomes difficult. I want to end with this thought. Don't wait for your body to force a decision. Don't wait for your family to pay the price. Don't wait for the loss to become the teacher. Some of you may not agree with me everything I have said today, and that's okay. If this message reaches even one person, at the right time, then this conversation was worth having. Thank you for listening. Wa akhir dawan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
O you who have believed, indeed, intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah, and divining arrows are but defilement from the work of Satan. So avoid it that you may be successful.